All right, so we're going to learn how to create trip preferences as well as use the internal load calculating algorithm within the quick manifest feature. So the trip preferences are just the standard operating procedures that you or your crew follow when going to or from an incident. And it's used within this feature to tell the algorithm how you want your crew members and gear distributed amongst the different loads. So to begin creating one, select on that trip preference panel and add a new one. To edit the name, click on the edit icon up here and add the name. So for this example, we're going to be creating a trip preference for how we arrive on an incident. We're going to call it going to a fire. And we're going to start adding load preferences. So one of our preferences for how we go to a fire is that we want our superintendent and our assistant superintendent to always go first, for example. This way that we have supervisory roles that arrive on the incident, gain situational awareness, and provide operational direction for when the rest of the crew arrives. So we're going to select first. So our first load preference places those crew members onto the first load based on the order selected. So it's going to try to place Burnham first and then Burnett after that. If the weight of the crew member or the gear selected exceeds the available load weight that is left, it's going to then place them on the second load available. So it's going to work from the first load all the way to the last, and it's going to do that cyclically. So we're going to save that preference and we're going to add a new one. This time we're going to make sure our foreman and our air operations lead goes on the last load. So this works similar to the first preference, except it does it in the reverse direction. So in this example, we want our foreman and our air operations going last. That way we can have a supervisory role that's hanging out with the rest of the crew in case the crew on the fire gets socked in, that we still have some direction with the remainder of the crew. And we can have our air operations lead there so that they're hanging out and directing air operations for each and every load. So next we're going to create a gear preference. And that gear preference might be that I want a trauma bag and a sat phone going on the first load. This way, if the crew gets socked in, they still have medical supplies and a way to communicate. And then in a similar process, I'm going to get the trauma bag and the sat phone to stay with the remainder crew on a last load preference. And then finally, I'm going to make sure that I have water and food on every load. So I'm going to select QB and MRE. You can change the quantities here if you would like. And I'm going to choose the balanced load preference. So this balanced load preference is going to distribute the selected crew members and gear evenly across the loads, working from the first load to the last. So it's going to place a QB and an MRE on every single load until you run out of QBs and MREs. And it's going to do this cyclically. So I'm going to save, and I have my standard operating procedures for how my crew goes to a fire. So to use that trip preference, I'm going to navigate over to the manifest feature here, and I'm going to toggle up here to internal. I'm going to create a trip name, and then I'm going to define the number of seats that are available on the helicopter. I'm going to select what members of my crew are going. If your whole crew, to include gear, is going, just keep that toggle or that checkbox selected. If you need only a specific squad of your crew, you can select the crew members that you would like in this dialog here, as well as the gear. You can select certain quantities. Then you input the trip preference that you just made into your fire or into the algorithm, so it distributes your crew members and gear how you like them. So then I'm going to choose the allowable weight of the helicopter. If you would like to manually input it in, just click on this keyboard icon and input it in here. And then click calculate. So once it gets done calculating, it's going to show up in your saved trips page. So it is important to note that the algorithm is transparent. So if you do something crazy and try to break the app, it will let you know. So if, for example, I want to do a super low allowable weight and save, and I try to test the limits, it might be constrained by the limits that you put on it, and it's going to show you that there was an error and that not all crew members or gear were allocated due to tight weight constraints. So it's going to show you the remaining crew members that did not get allocated. And so typically you can just try again and just input everything in that you did before, and it might just do something different and allocate those crew members to the loads, or you can just navigate over to here and edit your trip and add those crew members back in this fashion. So going back to our original trip, the China Fire, if we select on that and we want to edit our trip, we're going to click on this options icon here. And right now we have a overview of all of our loads that were generated. And we can see here that in load 1, like we said, Burnham and Burnett are superintendent and assistant. We're on our first load. Ashford and Branson, our foreman and air operations, are on our last, like we said. And if we go through, we can see that we have an MRE and a QB on this load with the SAP phone and trauma bag like we defined. And if you go to any load, you'll see that there's at least a QB and MRE. So it's placing the gear and the crew members into the loads just as we defined. So if you would like to edit any of these, like say you don't want Harrison here on load 3, or you actually want him on load 4, just remember that your tools are always attached to your crew member. So right now we just have a chainsaw, which is going to be attached to a saw team. So if you were to, for example, remove Roy here, it's going to get rid of the chainsaw. So we still have a chainsaw here, but the yellow indicates that it's part of our gear inventory. When you see blue, that means that it is a personal tool. So if I were to delete a saw team member here, I'll see that one of my Dolmars got deleted. But if I were to add the crew member back, you can see that there's no personal tools in this load. But let's say I add Patel and Roy back, you're going to see that, oh, those personal tools got back included with them. And there's not something that you can edit out, but they are instead attached to each individual crew member. So one of the things that this editing trip feature here does is that if we go over our allowable weight or our allowable or available number of seats, it's going to show us. So it's going to show you that on the top, you're going to get a red indicator that shows you that you're overweight or that there's not enough seats. And it's going to pop up black for you. So that wraps up the internal load calculating feature. And we're going to move on to some of the other features within the app in the upcoming video.